I can bring it up today, but it's really interesting story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm kind of saving that for I try to come up with a Halloween, new movies all the time to watch for Halloween. So I'm thinking that I was kind of hoping to be streaming by now.
Right.
At least on an available service. It looks like I might have to pay for it or whatever.
Yeah.
But I've heard good things about it.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. I think I waited in the theaters. I just knew what it was going to be like.
Yeah.
It's Universal, especially, has a long history with how they deal with the scene. I should say. Well, that trip.
They had some sort of opening in Augusta. Dave was like, "You want to come back and see it?" And I was like, "Dude, but that's like 2 hours and a half. I couldn't do it."
What's going on?
I remember him texting me about it. Anyway, I probably couldn't make it because it's just a long trip.
It is a long
And I've got so much stuff to do with teaching and everything.
Absolutely. All right, I think it's 4 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
So, I guess we will start. Howdy, everyone. Hey. Welcome. Now, the topic is called Vampires on the Loose, but we're going to try to keep them contained. So, if you're feeling nervous about, being in the room, we'll see what we can do. But I'm Mike Gordon. I am the track director here for the literature, comics, and art track here. And welcome. And we're glad to see you here. And I will let John introduce himself.
Sure. John Edgar Browning. I've been coming to Monsterama now for my 9th year. And I teach as a professor. I also write a lot of books and articles on vampires and Dracula and stuff like that. I've done some talks about vampires in a few TV shows like Eli Roth's History of Horror and William Shatner's The Unexplained and his old show, what was it called? William Shatner's Weird What? Like 10 years ago. Anyway, yeah, so I'm a vampire Dracula person. I do all the horror, but those are my specialty.
So we were talking right before the panel started, and we actually don't have a plan of attack. So as far as focus, as far as what kind of, so we're kind of curious, if there's anything that you guys have as far as vampires that you would like us to discuss or that interest you, because they have been, there's just it's a huge topic. Obviously, we can focus on Dracula, the original character, the many movie adaptations, etc., or other vampires. There's so many other great vampire figures out there as well, in literature as well. And then there's new movies, new books coming out all the time. We were just kind of talking about the Last Voyage of the Demeter that came out. And has anybody seen that?
No, I want to.
Okay, so 3 people. So 3 people have seen it. Yeah. We have not seen it. We are very familiar with the scene. We're very familiar with the part of Dracula that it takes part in. But you said you had some interesting information about that because it's been, I guess it's been in the planning stages for 10 years.
Yeah, a long time. I've known some of the screenwriters who had a treatment and it kind of was making its way up the grapevine and then eventually didn't make it. And finally they came out with, in fact, James B. Hart, who wrote Bram Stoker's Dracula movie, 1992, he had written a treatment for it a while back and then he just kind of, I think even his son tried to write a treatment for it and he just kind of washed his hands of it. But even before it came out, I knew it was going to be a really interesting story because it represents a scene in the novel that even Bram Stoker had to kind of tiptoe around because there's always been this weird sort of sexual politics behind any vampire's mouth and fangs, especially Dracula's. And Stoker is probably thinking, how am I going to handle Dracula being on a boat with a bunch of guys and he has to feed? You would think that it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but you can literally trace the history of our culture, our sociopolitics, by looking at Dracula's mouth and who he's put it on and what they've shown on TV and the sex, the class, race, the sexuality of the people he's bitten. And very early on in cinema, Dracula's victims were primarily white, straight, upper class, feminine, heterosexual Christian women. Okay, and eventually by the 60s and 70s, he starts spreading out. Christopher Lee even takes a black female victim in Dracula 80, 1972. So it's a really big deal if you just watch the politics. But anyway, Stoker is like, how am I going to handle this? So all we get from that scene in the novel is the captain's log. And it's, you know, the captain wakes up, one of the crew who was assigned to be the watchman that night disappears. So we're left to assume that essentially Dracula appears at night when there's the night watchman. He feeds and then pushes them overboard. But we never really get anything closer than that. So, well, when the 1931 Lugosi Dracula came around, they had it such that in the Spanish Dracula, for example, has anyone seen the Spanish Dracula? It was filmed simultaneously with Carlos Villas or Carlos Villar. They call him Carlos Villar in the movie because Carlos Villarreal sounded too ethnic, they thought, even though it's the Spanish Dracula. But anyway, I digress. In their version, which I think is terrific, we see Carlos Villarreal walking around the ship, like Nosferatu in 1922, you know. But we don't have that in the 31. We just have, there's a storm, Renfield talks to Dracula in the bowels of the ship, and then suddenly the ship is at the shore, and there's this voiceover, which is actually Todd Browning, the director, saying, it must have been the storm that killed them all, you know. Anyway, they had it where Lugosi would be walking around the ship, just like in the Spanish Dracula, but Carl Lindley Jr., who was running Universal for his dad, was like, no, wrote on the script, Dracula only goes for women. So go men. Anyway, so that's kind of how it started, and in subsequent Universal picture, the Dracula, they made sure that they really tiptoed around Dracula having to put his mouth on another guy, to the point where it becomes almost ludicrous. For example, in House of Dracula, or House of Frankenstein, rather, John Carradine plays Dracula, and in order for him to be freed, he promises the character that Boris Karloff plays that he will go and kill this Burgomeister. And when he arrives as a bat, turns into a human, and sees the Burgomeister asleep in a chair that's old dude. And then it pans back over to Dracula, who turns into a bat, and then the camera pans back over, and we see the shadow silhouette of the old guy in his chair on the wall. And we see the shadow silhouette of the bat fly over and land on the guy to bite him and feed on him and kill him. So anyway, Universal's always been like that. So now let me skip ahead to 1979 with Frank Langella. Sure enough, when Dracula appears at the start, breaking up his coffin, because they're trying to throw his coffin overboard, he's very bestial in the way he attacks the men, then he turns into a wolf right away before he attacks the captain. So they don't want him getting his mouth anywhere near those guys. So now I bring us to the last voyage of the Demeter. I knew something was going to happen where they're going to have to be careful, because they always have been. And in Bram Stoker's Dracula 92, if y'all recall that montage sequence where Dracula is in wolf form on the Demeter, and the blood is splattering everywhere and on the sails and stuff, and they make it so animalistic that he sexualizes the whole thing. So when I finally saw the poster for Last Voyage of the Demeter, and it showed this big human-sized form of bat, I went, here we go. So I haven't seen the movie yet, but I imagine when Dracula's doing a lot of this feeding and attacking, he's going to be in some big bat form. No. And I saw, no, he does it in human form. Really?
Yep. Am I right?
Yeah.
So when he attacks the dudes, he attacks them on camera.
Yeah.
And he bites them, and it shows him putting his mouth on them.
There's lots of blood.
There's a lot of ripping throats out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But
It's
we're
pretty
talking about,
animalistic, though.
Okay, so they keep
Yeah.
animalistic, but I assume if they're going to have the extent of having him be this big bat thing, that they're going to have him stay in that form.
He's that too, because there's one fight sequence where that's how he escapes. But when he's ripping the throats out, he's in his vampire form. But you mentioned turning into a wolf and stuff. In the book, don't they say that when the Demeter crashes, that a large dog runs off?
I was going to say, to be fair, like as far as the book goes, I mean, he could have been in wolf form the entire. We don't know. I mean, but that's the only form that we get of him in the book. That he was, in wolf form at some point on the ship. So they had it out. Anyway, so
And you got to remember, in the book, book, it's only like, the chapter is only like 6 pages long.
Sure.
So there's a lot to fill in and
Yeah.
to leave, to create.
Right.
But it's not just, yeah, and you're right, it's not just Dracula. I mean, Dracula obviously is always the money, like, big studio movies. But even, I was watching House of Dark Shadows, with Barnabas Collins, and I sort of had to laugh a few times because there's times where he's like, I need to feed, I need to feed, I need to feed, and there's like guys like right there. And he's like, I need to feed, give me someone, I need someone. It's like, you just, yeah, that's because they were so afraid to do that.
Yep. Yeah, in a nutshell, it's funny. In fact, in most of the Christopher Lee Dracula films, the goal that Dracula needs to achieve is often between him and another guy or guys. But he can't do it directly, so therefore he vamps a girl who ends up doing the work for him. So girls have always kind of been the basketball in the court between the guys. But even in the novel, you could almost assume that the girls are there so that Dracula can achieve his ends and whatnot. So there are other ways in the novel that Stoker really danced around things. I'll say this one more thing and we can move on. But even in the British edition of Dracula 1897, there's the scene at the very, very end of chapter 4, it's right before the novel goes from Transylvania to Whitby, England, and Jonathan is hearing noises outside of his door. He looks outside, and 3 brides are out there laughing, giggling, and waving at him and stuff, and pointing. And then Dracula shows up, not the same way he did before, where he threw them across the room, but he shows up, and he tells them in the British edition, not now, back off, whatever, tomorrow night is yours. And in the 1899 American edition, which I guess Stoker got to keep in the lines he wanted, because maybe America was more progressive at the time, but it says, tonight is mine, tomorrow night is yours. So that basically was indication that Dracula intended to feed on him, briefly at least, before leaving to go to Whitby. So, well, now I have to watch the movie now that I know.
Yeah, you
You
should.
definitely should.
But he still is very bestial about it. You don't
Oh,
actually.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
there's nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's not as handsome as Frank Franklin Gallo. Or even Bela Lugosi. He certainly is a vile creature.
Right.
And he also kills a child
Yeah.
Okay.
on the boat.
A
which-
male child.
Okay.
Male
Oh,
child.
Right on. Right
And a
on.
dog, which is the worst.
Well, I'm interested.
That's the worst.
Well, has anyone seen the Netflix / BBC Dracula 3-part miniseries came out in 2019?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
one with Sister Agatha?
Yes.
Yeah.
I loved it. That show knew what it was. It knew that Dracula has kind of always been really kind of pansexual and weird, and I think they didn't care. They just said, we're just going to let him do his own thing. So they don't care watching Dracula put his mouth and fangs on other guys. But anyway, I just thought it was a really interesting tidbit to watch, talk about the evolution of his bite. So,
Nuns and
Yeah.
Guns, that's my favorite.
You were talking about in the early film versions of Dracula, only one for Black Caucasian Christian women. We just recently watched Blackula, which is an interesting take on it, and it's very campy and somewhat humorous, but it's a different take on a vampire.
But it is interesting in Blackula how Blackula gets turned, because
Yeah.
Dracula himself
Yeah.
bites him.
right.
Yeah.
So, and I'm like, that was pretty radical.
It was. That movie is crazy radical. In fact, it all starts with Barnabas Collins. Barnabas Collins was this first vampire that, and it's good that the Hays Code wasn't around anymore, but basically it's a vampire that doesn't want to be a vampire, hates the fact that he has to feed on blood, and he was really sympathetic. And audiences had never seen a vampire like that. They were like, wow. And it was the first time that we ever were, even with the production code, that censorship in Hollywood, that cinema and TV allowed us to feel sorry for, even root for a bad guy. And that did so well that by '72, AIP approached the director, the black director, and they approached William Marshall, and they were going to do this really hokey thing like Count Brown's in town, I think. And he's like, no, I'm a Shakespearean actor. If I'm going to do this, we're going to have to change the script up a bit. So he went in and said, why don't we have it start in Transylvania, and this guy, Prince Mangualde, is royalty. He's going to go there with his bride, Lula, and they're wanting to help stop the slave trade. And anyway, he infuses the movie with all this African culture and African history, and literally make it the film it was. In fact, it was probably the only blaxploitation film that was made by African Americans for African Americans. It was the only one that wasn't hokey and not kind of a white version of what
Well,
black
they did a
culture is.
sequel too.
Yes.
Which we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, well, you should.
Yeah, you should, yeah.
Just watch Blackula.
It's a great film. And plus his first two victims, Blackula's victims, is a gay couple, a biracial gay couple,
Yeah.
who were in Transylvania buying antiques.
As you do.
That's a little bit colorful. Yeah, we'll take that.
Right. So,
We're sending you guests.
but he bites them and he turns them. Anyway, so that movie is incredibly progressive, and it does so great that the very next year is the Jack Palance Dracula, Dan Curtis, who of course Dan Curtis did Dark Shadows, and that Dracula is essentially a proto-form of the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula. He sees a reincarnation of his lost bride back when he was Vlad Dracula, basically, and wants to go find her and fall in love with her again. So that was part of this new way of seeing vampires as very sympathetic characters. And then, of course, Anne Rice is looking at all this, and it's like, I'm going to put down my erotica porn novels that I write and write Interview with the Vampire. So that was this huge little cascading effect where we start seeing these vampires that are still gray in terms of their morals, but they don't want to be what they are. So it's a great thing.
Isn't there a character in Interview with the Vampire that doesn't like to feed on humans, that feeds on?
Yeah,
Yes.
Louis, yeah.
Yeah, Louis.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, he can't force, he can't stomach the idea of killing someone. So,
Yes.
And then now that with the AMC series, they flipped the script and they put in the 20s, and Louis is a African American man that runs a brothel instead of being a white slave owner.
Yeah.
So it's a really good series.
Yeah.
And they out and out have relations, the whole nine yards,
Yeah.
which is like, I think one of the first times.
Yeah.
They allude to it in the one in the 90s with Tom Cruise
Yeah.
and
Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt, that you don't see anything, but it's,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
quite, yeah, it's
They're
quite.
finally being able to show what they kind of always wanted to show, but with decensorship, it allows them to actually say those things. But yeah. But anyone else favorite vampires or favorite Dracula characters from recently or the past?
yeah. There's just vampires on the loose, so it's loose talk.
You ever see a movie
Anything
called
else?
Byzantium?
Yeah.
That was kind of an interesting take.
It had one thing that I loved that I'd never seen before, and that was that the mother and daughter figures were walking around, and one of them suddenly goes, I've been here before, I remember this place. And it was the idea of living for so long that you might forget, the way we forget after so many years. And she remembers being somewhere, someplace a long time ago, and memories coming back. I thought that was a really interesting facet and characterization of vampires.
I like the idea of the mercy killing.
Mhm. Yeah. Again, sympathetic.
Yeah.
Vampires.
I've kind of gotten to the point where I feel like they've done the sympathetic vampire to death. And I want vampires to get back to being the sociopathic serial killers that they were meant to be.
But it sounds like the one in The Last Voyage of the Demeter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing redeeming about him.
No,
It's
no,
I mean,
no, feeding machine.
it's been sort of the thing that that Mina is the reincarnation of Dracula's former lover and everything, and he wants to get her back. I always got the feeling that he went after Mina because that would hurt everybody in the group that's coming after him. That's the only reason why he goes after
He
him.
does. In the Christopher Lee Dracula films, he would often do that. He would have someone, and because they killed one of his followers, he's like, I'm going to get back at you all for doing that to my bride, even though it may be a guy that was helping him. You saw it in Taste the Blood of Dracula and a few of the other ones. So, yeah, he goes after Mina just to say, screw you.
Yeah.
You'll never take my bride away from me, Lucy. Yeah.
It seems to go, there's that pattern though, because like they'll start off, seems like, we had the first Dracula movie, and then, that plays out, and it gets to the point where it's ridiculous. Because they're meeting up with Abbott and Costello, right? And so you can't really take vampires seriously anymore. And so then they kind of downplay it for a bit, And then I think the next big boom is like Hammer.
Yep.
So with Christopher Lee, and then they're scary again. And then that gets taken to the point where, you know, we're working with jumping vampire ninjas. And so that gets silly, you know, and you have the Frank Langella version, and then right away, like, they capitalize it with the Love at First Bite movie.
Yeah.
And certainly when I was growing up.
And then you get Twilight.
Well, I was just about to say, like, so you get, like, you know, so after all that, like, when I was growing up, you know, I'd seen the horror movies on, you know, Creature Feature, double feature on Saturdays in Boston, and so you know, those were pretty intense and those were cool and everything. But then, you know, they were in sitcoms and they were like doing like, you know, specials and holiday specials for kids and everything like that. So, I mean, it was, if you're pardon the pun, it was a really defanged character and not one to be taken seriously. And then I read Anne Rice. And I was like, oh, I can take him seriously again, you know? And then that plays out to Twilight, and then you can't take him seriously again. Well, for some people. I mean, I don't want to, like, yeah, I'm not going to bash on Twilight. It's not for me, but it's, you know, I know it's got a certain sect of people that really like that stuff. And so, you know, I think it goes through patterns where it gets really ridiculous and it gets really fun. I mean, a lot, you know, I just finished watching season 5 of What We Do in the Shadows.
Yes.
You know, that is a crazy show where they do like, I mean,
Funniest thing on TV.
Yeah.
it is a blast. It is a blast. At first, the first season I watched it, I was a little, I'll be honest with you, I was a little disappointed. I liked the movie a lot because the movie had like different kinds, like different. It was a play on different versions of vampires throughout the years.
Yeah.
You had your sort of Count Dracula figure, but then you had your Twilight figure, and you had like it seemed to represent more different kinds of vampires. Where it seemed like when I started watching What We Do in the Shadows, it was just basically like Seinfeld with fangs. Like it just seemed like it was like New York, like, you know, and then they started like really playing around with the whole vampire mythos. And this last season, I don't know if anybody's seen the last season, but yeah, with Guillermo going through everything he went through, I mean, it was just a blast. Because I was thinking maybe, you know, how long can they take this? But just when I think they've taken it as far as they can, especially with Colin Robinson, like they find new ways to like just make it hilarious.
The sky's the limit with it, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Do you appreciate that as well?
Oh yeah, I saw the movie. In fact, when I first saw the movie, I had just written a piece for the Conversations, this public-facing academic thing online. But anyway, what they named my article something different. It was called What They Do in the Shadows. I was like, interesting title. And when I was telling my students that year, it was at Georgia Tech, they were like, oh, that's based on the mockumentary, What We Do in the Shadows. I'm like, really? What's that? I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. Then I saw it eventually, and I just loved it. Oh my God, I loved it. And when the show came out, about the first 4 episodes of the first season, I was kind of like, yeah, you know. By the end of it, I'm like, okay, I think I like this. And by the second season, it just took me. I love it. Nandor is my favorite. I love Nandor. Love it.
Yeah, and it is, yeah, it's one of those things like, I mean, I like vampires so much, and like you, I like them when they're harder edged.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes comedies just, to me, just don't work because it's not, I don't know, it just seems like they're just playing it for laughs and not really understanding it, you know, and adding something new to it. And I was worried that was going to be the case with the mockumentary, the first movie, and I remember watching the movie and I was thinking, I had sort of had my arms crossed, like, oh yeah, okay, is this supposed to be funny or whatever? And then they're all outside the nightclub waiting because they can't get in because they haven't been invited. And I was like, oh my God, that's so funny.
That show is also a spoof on those reality shows like Big Brother,
Oh, yeah,
where you have a
absolutely.
bunch of people living in a house together.
Yeah, they really have played that up with the last couple seasons when they did the whole episode that was kind of a mock version of the like the home improvement shows and everything, and all that. So yeah, they've been really playing around with that. So I mean, I guess this guy's, I don't know if they've got a 6th season.
I don't know.
So,
Not too bad.
yeah, because, I love it, so. Anything else vampire related that you guys really appreciate, like out there? Yeah, in back.
Dracula Untold.
Ooh.
So I think when, a few years ago, when there was all that hype about Universal relaunching their monsters, I really think that's a fantastic movie. A lot of people hated it, didn't
It was
get a
good.
lot
I
of
loved
attention.
it. I loved it.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't.
Mhm.
But I think that movie's brilliant. I love that movie, especially the fight scenes after he becomes a vampire and he's fighting the Ottomans. I just think it's a really well done, beautiful movie visually.
Mhm.
I love it. I thought it was great. I was hoping they would stick to this, let Dracula, ever since 9/11, basically, monsters have become something very different. They become innocent until proven guilty, heroes, harbingers of social change. So I was glad that they found a way to make someone who sticks poles through people and hoists them up in the air. They're able to make this guy come out the end where we like him, and that's what they did. It's a good film. Anyone else like Dracula Untold, or? Yeah.
We did like that.
Okay.
I was gonna mention, Shadow of the Vampire.
Shadow of the Vampire.
Which
Oh,
they showed
yeah.
last night.
Yeah.
I thought that was really,
Mm-hmm.
really interesting. And
Yeah, came out in 2000. I think I was in college at the time. It was really good. It was also campy, and not as campy as what they do in the Shadows, but it's but campy in a really, really good way. It's almost like, I would even call that a precursor to what they do in the Shadows, since it's basically a film about the making of this film and the way they're acting off screen. Even John Malkovich's character as Murnau is hilarious at times.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't. It's not like it doesn't take itself too seriously, and yet there's a creep film aspect to it that really works. Defoe is just.
Oh, yeah.
The best. He is so good. He is so good.
Speaking of which, what do we know about this new Nosferatu coming out? Anything?
I don't know anything about the new Nosferatu.
Yeah, a new one, yeah. I think they've announced who's gonna play Warlock or Dracula, but, wait, let me look it up real quick.
Yeah, I don't know. I try to not pay attention to a lot of that stuff because a lot of that stuff doesn't even happen, right? Like, so I'm not gonna, I see a lot of people get worked up about, like, online or whatever, about this casting or that this or whatever, and I'm like, you know what, this might not even ever happen. So, like, once it gets to the theater or once it gets on streaming or whatever, then we can talk about it, yeah, I got to.
They have a director, it's the guy that directed The Witch and Lighthouse, so it's gonna have a really cool
Lighthouse.
atmospheric, this is gonna be very German expressionist.
Yeah, unfortunately, like, after using Defoe in Lighthouse, I'm like, well, Defoe would be perfect, but because he had already kind of done that, it's like, it might not work, right? So.
Looks like they have Eric Northman, his brother, Eric Northman from,
True Blood.
thank you, his brother Bill Skarsgård is gonna be playing Count Warlock.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so they've, and Willem Dafoe will play, looks like, Professor Alvin Herbert von Franz.
I can see that.
So at least it'll be in.
Wonder if they're gonna go with a real, like, stylized look. I mean, that would be.
Well, if they're using that guy, Edward, who did The Witch, has anyone seen The Witch? Gorgeous movie. And Lighthouse, those are both very atmospheric, because they're gonna really tap into German expressionism again, I think. It's gonna be nice. Did you have your hand up, sir, for a?
Yeah, just to go back to what this gentleman said about feral vampires, one of my all-time favorites, and I just watched it last week. Excuse me, rewatched it, The Night Stalker.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That vampire is just barely above an animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had never seen the original two movies. I'd seen the series before, like a few years ago, whatever, but I never actually watched the first two movies. And I'm a co-host of a podcast for Station One. We do a weekly podcast, and for October I do all the programming for creepy stuff and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, you know what? I've never seen and it's the 50th anniversary of the show, but I've never seen the first two movies, Night Stalker and Night Strangler. So I made that. So we watched that for the first time, and then we talked about it on the show. And that first one. Like those two, first of all, I think the two movies are better than any of the episodes of the TV series. And that first one is pretty good. yeah, Dan Curtis coming off some Dark Shadow vibes for sure. But that vampire is pretty feral, pretty, yeah, like you said, serial killer.
And that's 72, so he did that. Of course, there's a lot of Dracula in that character. But then, of course, that's, I guess, a precursor for him to actually do Dracula in 73 with Jack Palance, which he does for England.
Yes.
So it was kind of
It's a great adaptation, too.
Yeah.
The other thing I watched this year, too, for the first time, because I always try to watch a version of Dracula, but I'd never seen the 2006 British version with Dan Stevens. Has anybody seen this one? This one is really unique. It's beautifully shot. I mean, it's British production, so it's, you know.
BBC, yeah.
Yeah, and Dan Stevens is in it, and, I can't remember the name, who plays Dracula. Mark Warren plays Dracula.
Yes.
And it's quite good, but the angle that they take on it is very different. I mean, Dan Stevens plays the sort of fiance of Lucy.
Okay.
And
Homewood?
yeah, and he's like behind bringing Dracula over and all this stuff, like spoilers, but he's much more integral to the whole plot, which I don't know if that's because I'm Dan Stevens and I'm in this, so beef up my part, or if it was just an interesting take.
That would have been before Downton Abbey, so it wasn't.
It was done right. It was done. Yeah, before that.
So rather than just being the rich boyfriend who eventually just pays for everything to go stalk and hunt Dracula, he pretty much pays for everything.
Yeah.
He's just not just a checkbook. You know, he's actually integral.
Yeah, here he's got a medical condition and he needs blood transfusion, and so he goes to this weird doctor figure who turns out to be a cultist of Dracula, and it's like, I can bring someone over who will help you cleanse your blood. and that person is Dracula. And Dracula comes over, and of course, you know, havoc ensues. But it's a really interesting take, and if you guys can seek it out, I found it on YouTube actually. So I recommend checking it out.
It's just Dracula from 2006.
Yeah, it's just Dracula.
It's a BBC production.
Yeah.
So why did he come over when this guy asked? Did Dracula, was he broke or something? He need the guy to pay for it? Like, why did he?
Yeah, because they do the sequence where Jonathan goes over to you know, to see his house and everything, and his house is in disrepair. I mean, yeah, he needs an upgrade. So
So Dracula doesn't have money. He's like, well, this guy will pay for everything. He's rich, and I'll give him his eternal life. I'm assuming he does that or tries to.
You gotta watch the movie.
Well, it's rare that we get a Dracula that doesn't have money.
I mean, let's go, so you, even if you pay, so you bring Dracula over and, you know, try to order him around and see what happens? That's kind of what happens.
Okay.
Oh, the other thing on that one too is Van Helsing is played by David Suchet, like the guy who played Rollo.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting, really different take on that too. So they really play loose with the text.
Does he affect a French accent, like Hercule Poirot?
No, I think it's a more of a German.
Dutch.
Dutch. Yeah. He tries that.
Sounds like the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like people are like, you must be French. No, I'm Dutch. Sorry.
Yeah. There are a lot of book reviews of Dracula. I've collected almost 400 of them, contemporary ones from the time, and I can't tell you at least half of them refer to Van Helsing as the German guy. And it's like, no, he's Dutch. He's Dutch. But they all just, and they also referred to Dracula the novel as a book of the werewolf all the time. It's an interesting story behind that. But yeah, they all kind of refer to it as a book about the werewolf.
You guys seen Ultraviolet, the British miniseries?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, I have.
That is like one of the greatest.
I've seen half of an episode, and I knew when I saw it, I put it on you're going to watch that on
Yeah, I don't know if
Christmas
it's
break.
available streaming, but
It's
great.
It is great. The only sad thing about it is that they did that first season and they didn't get picked up or whatever, so it just kind of it doesn't really end. So it's kind of unfinished. So because there's so much cool stuff that happens there, but it's like it just kind of that's the last episode, and you're like, damn.
So the watch is going to be masochistic, because you'll love it by the end, but then you can't go any further.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
I like
really
it.
atmospheric.
Okay.
I like
Midnight Mass.
Yeah.
Midnight-
Yeah,
I've
the
heard
Midnight
that-
Mass fans.
Yeah, I've heard good things about Midnight Mass.
Watch Midnight Mass. It's really, really good. It's a miniseries on Netflix. I think
Yeah, it's really
Netflix.
good.
And it's terrific. It's a different take. It's actually, have you seen Midnight Mass?
I haven't. no.
When you, if you like feral vampires, if you like vicious, you're not supposed to like them vampires, this is it.
But I like the end of it, how the people
Yeah.
decided.
We'll just say that someone, in a nutshell, goes to the Holy Land, a really aging priest,
Yeah,
and gets lost in the desert during a desert storm, takes refuge in a cave that opens up. Let's just say it ends up being the ruins of some ancient religious temple, and inside is lurking a cross between a human vampire and a bat, like wings, almost like an angel, but more scary. And he's terrifying. And also put in some Nosferatu in there, the way it looks. Bring the priest back to his little island in Maine, where his community is, and this priest wants to help the island through what you'll see. But just watch it. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
You're gonna like it.
It's by, I know it's by Mike Flanagan, who just did Fall of the House Usher, which is not vampires, but it's very cool miniseries that I just finished watching. So I recommend that as well. So, but that, I like that so much that I was like, oh, what else has he done? And he's done, you know.
So you haven't seen Midnight Mass yet?
I have not, yeah. And so I didn't even know there were vampires in it.
Yep.
And I'm a really big fan of the original miniseries of Salem is Live.
I grew up with it. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. And if any excuse I get, I'll show a scene from it in my classes. It doesn't. It can be like tangentially related, and I'll be like, well, let's watch a scene from Salem's Lot, 1979. I love it. Yeah. Other fans of the Salem's Lot from '79. It was a miniseries directed by Toby Hooper, who also did
Yeah.
the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And
Starring
also-
David Soul,
Yeah.
James Mason.
Yeah. Such a good movie.
Oh, yes.
So, and originally a book by Stephen King, right? And then, didn't he do a prequel?
Yeah, Jerusalem's
Jerusalem's
Lot,
Lot? Yeah, and I don't know if that's any good.
I read it.
Yeah,
It's good. Yeah.
It is.
I watched the Salem's Lot with Rob Lowe. It was definitely closer to the novel
Yeah.
than the '79, but I don't know. We got so used to the Nosferatu-esque Barlow with the '79 version that when you see Rutger Hauer playing this blonde German vampire, it's kind of like,
Yeah.
even though that's the way he's supposed to be in the novel, it's just, you know, I got used to Mr. Barlow. The actor had been in a severe fire, and so his face was damaged, and when they put the makeup on, it made him just that much more creepy. In case you wanted to know. Other, yes,
Have y'all talked about Nature Stoker yet?
we haven't. I mean, which one, the newest one?
Yeah.
The pre-Dracula?
That was right.
Dracula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, what would you like to say?
I bet it's amazing.
Okay.
I don't mean to be a salesperson, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's worth the read.
What
Yeah.
happened to that? This was before the pandemic, so I don't know what happened. I was talking to Dave, and he said that somebody had opted that for a movie.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Is it still in the works? do you know?
Yeah, that stuff comes and goes all the time. They can, you know, have him sign something, give him a little bit of money, wait and see if it happens. If it doesn't, then they no longer have the rights to hold it, you know. But that stuff just comes and goes all the time. In fact, when he first wrote Dracula the Undead, it was supposed to happen simultaneously with a film deal that was supposed to happen. But then with his co-author, Jim Holt, but then that fell through. And so he just felt embarrassed with the publisher because he kind of semi-promised them that there's going to be this film out too, but anyway, it didn't happen. Hollywood is thinking like that. Yes?
A movie that came out last year, The Invitation.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I just now finally got to see it. I was not expecting, what's his name, to be Dracula. I really wasn't. I was expecting him to be some sort of, not Renfield type figure, but he would be introducing
What was on
the master, as I call him. That's why I'm wearing his ring right now. But yeah, eventually when he's Dracula, I'm like, oh, okay. Definitely not what I was expecting. But once he started aging, after he staked towards the end, and you start to see him look a lot like Christopher Lee with the gray streaks through his hair, that was much better. I wish he'd started like that and then gotten younger, but I did not pick him out as being Dracula at all. But it was an interesting take. I liked it for that. It was enjoyable. Anyone else see the invitation?
Is it a theatrical?
Yeah, it was a movie. Yeah, it was.
It's
It's
on
on-
the stream.
Yeah, I think it's on Netflix.
It's really good.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's in my queue.
it's really not. It's really not bad. It's a very different take, and I'm all about different takes on Dracula. Dracula needs that new blood, because that's why Dracula keeps living, going on and on and on. If it gets too stale, then people back off. But Dracula will just keep coming back. He keeps coming back because society changes, and we have new needs and new fears and new wants. So
Same thing with
Dracula's there.
zombie movies.
Huh?
Same thing with zombie movies.
Very true. Very true.
I used to get hung up on that whole, like, you know, the perfect adaptation of Dracula doesn't exist. And particularly when they would put the moniker on there, like Bram Stoker's Dracula, I'd be like, it's not. Like, it's just not. Like, you know, you can put that on there, but it's not. Because, and then the more I've read the book, the more I realized, I think this last time I reread the book, and I was just thinking, you can't. You just can't. The way that the book is set up, the narrative, the way the structures are, with the journal entries, you know, in a certain order, mixed with news items and everything like that. It's just sort of brilliant in the way it's constructed, and there's just no way to replicate that. And so, yeah, so I've stopped. I still don't like it when they use Bram's name like in a title like that, like Bram Stoker's Dracula, whatever. Because I'm like, you know, I mean, yes, he created the character, so to speak, but it's not his version. There's no definitive version. They take what they want, and certain versions take different things, and it's more effective than others. But I'm with you. Like, dial it up and let me see a different version and see what they're doing with it.
Well, they always make, in Dracula, he's, you know, hairy-fingered and ugly and everything. They always make him a young pretty boy. Or,
It should be
very old.
Yeah, it starts that way in Bram Stoker's Dracula. By the way, the reason why we'll see those names is often it has to copyright.
Yeah.
They can't call it Dracula because that's already taken. In
Right.
fact, the Dan Curtis Dracula in America was called Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is interesting. But yeah, because of copyright, they can't do it. The time, though, to adapt it as close to the novel as possible would have been really early on, like in the 30s, when you're closer to the Victorian. There were still people still living who remember the Victorian period. Now, there's a famous, she's now passed away a few years ago, Elizabeth Miller. She was famous for her works on Dracula, nonfiction, just like I am. But she was a traditionalist. She wanted like a hardcore traditional adaptation of the novel. And I've been the opposite. I'm like, if you adapt that and show it to my students, they will fall asleep. Yeah, that is for hardcore fans. Today, in the 30s, it would have done okay. But today, just a straightforward adaptation, people just won't like it. People will live it.
Yeah, there's not a lot of, I mean, there's not
We
much
would love
action.
it in here. We would love it. But if you want to make money off it, you know, no studio is going to back that with a checkbook, because the right one's going to want to see this Victorian period piece.
Yeah, because in a lot of ways, it's, you know, it would have to be done much in the way that, like, Jaws was, where you don't see him that often, you don't get his point of view. He's just a force to be reckoned with.
That could be really creative and great. I mean, it would do really well.
Yeah.
But it's just, if you can't infuse anything new, people can be like, why is this so boring? Because they're so used to Dracula. Well, they're like, why aren't you showing us Dracula? Because they're so used to the way Dracula's become and not the way it originally was.
Yeah.
I would love to see it, but I'm okay with it being non-traditional because I like Dracula to sell.
Yeah.
It gives me a career. It gives me stuff to write.
Well, and I like the fact that not only, I mean, each version, but, well, you know, when they try to put him in a modern world, what does that look like? And if you try to adhere to, you know, the original novel, it just doesn't work because the machinations of that just don't play out the way they would here. Like, people would do or say or what they would in a modern world. So you have to change everything. Like, how does Dracula survive in an era where everybody's got cell phones? Like, how does that work, you know?
I've got an interesting story about that. Well, you'll see him do that in the BBC Netflix Dracula 2019. I don't want to give too much away, but it's a 3-part series. Each episode is an hour and a half. Well, I have a book that's supposed to have come out 6 years ago, but finally next year it will, and it's a collection of almost 400 contemporary book reviews of Dracula published between 1897 and about 1920. And something that a good 70% of them say is they are totally weirded out by the fact that Stoker did something with his Gothic novel that had never been done before. When you read Gothic fiction in the 1800s, it always did two things. Even though it's written in the 1800s, it takes place at least 100 to 200 years in the past. And it happens over there in some exotic country, or it's written in England, but it happens in Spain or Italy. And both of those things, the temporal distance and the spatial distance, makes it seem believable. Okay, we don't believe in ghosts today, they would say in the 1800s, but I can see how they would believe in them, and they could even be real 200 years ago. Plus, if you have it happen in some exotic, by exotic, I mean the British would have considered southern Germany more exotic, or Italy or something, they can see a vampire being there, okay? Well, Stoker did something that no one else had ever done. He starts the novel with Jonathan going to Transylvania. He's almost there, basically, and the closer he gets to the castle, the more de-technologized it becomes. Eventually, he's in a calash that Dracula's driving, and there's no technology around. But then, that's okay, although it didn't vibe with readers yet, because even though this is the 1890s, it still felt like old world. Well, then once you bring Dracula to modern day London, they were like, what? And then once you give, Stoker almost thought of every kind of technology that was good at the time and put it in the novel, from telegram, typewriters, phonograph, a steamship, the little steamship that they ride down the river, the Danube, I think it is, to get to Dracula's castle at the end. All this technology. People commented on it. Whoa! And they were like, I don't know about this, but they're like, but I do like this. It was the first time they'd ever experienced that. And Dracula really is this kind of bridge from Gothic horror to horror, modern horror. So at the time, people commented on the same thing you just said, which is they can't imagine this working, having this fictional, supernatural thing that belongs in Germany being in modern day London, being around technology. But at the end of the reviews, they're like, but it worked.
Steampunk.
Huh?
Steampunk.
Yeah, it really was. And Stoker just thought of doing it. I don't know why he thought of doing it, but he definitely wanted to use what was available to him. And everything you see in the novel that makes Dracula Dracula, the look and behavior is definitely Sir Henry Irving, Bram Stoker's boss. But his knowledge, his prowess, his instinct, his knowledge of the courts, everything, that's Bram Stoker. I mean, I have articles from U.S. newspapers from the 1880s where it says, well, we just saw a ship arrive and we saw Bram Stoker on the dock unloading boxes, so you know who's going to be coming. That's what Henry Irving is talking about, but literally all of that goes right into his book. So the thing he knows the most about is modern day travel and modern day technology. And in fact, there was even a scene in Bram Stoker's notes for Dracula. This doesn't actually go into the book, but he wrote that Dracula cannot be Kodaked, can't be photographed. And when they tried Kodaking him, like a skeleton arm appeared, or a skeleton appeared, basically. Well, here's a cool tidbit. When Stoker, who loves science and technology, when he was in, I think, Philadelphia with Henry Irving, he went to some science museum, and they wanted Irving to put his hand on this thing where he would basically do an x-ray and you could see his skeleton arm. And Stoker obviously was impacted by that, considering he was about to use his boss as his stand-in for Dracula. I can't imagine how much Henry Irving was irradiated, though. They had machines. He was definitely irradiated, because they had those foot machines where people would go, before they buy shoes, see what their feet looked like. And of course, they all go home with radiation burns and probably cancer.
Well, wasn't one of Bram's brothers a doctor as well?
Yeah, two of them were. Yeah, and one of them was knighted by the Queen, so he was a big dude, surgeon. In fact, we even see
about modern medicine.
Yeah. In fact, his knowledge of transfusion, which was still being worked on, they didn't know yet about blood types. But all that information, in fact, it's even in his brother's handwriting in Stoker's notes. Even the imprint of the head, with the notes about where things are, that's not Stoker's handwriting, that's his brother. So he was all along being in the up and up when it comes to new advances. But he definitely knew the audience, the readers would react weirdly, and they did, but they loved it.
I still love it. I mean, it's one of those things that, like, even today, like I said, I reread it. It's my favorite book of all time. I reread it a number of times, and every time I read it, I take something else. I mean, I can get something else from it. It's just so rich. And I honestly can't say that about, I mean, I've read other, you know, vampire stories. I read them like a lot of other ones, and they don't even come close.
Yeah.
Except, of course, Dacres.
You would appreciate
I
it.
mean, I'm more to vampires and books
Mhm.
than movies.
Sure.
And when I was growing up, I think the only vampire things you saw were those big gray, black and white. I mean, you know, cheap. And that's all I knew about vampires. Well, then I grew up, and I must have been in my late 20s when I joined the Book of the Month Club. And their offering, the first time around, was Dracula.
Oh, wow.
I never read that book, never heard nothing. And I got it, and I read it. And then it's like books about vampires. And then was they offered an interview with the vampire, got that.
Good, good.
And then it was Stephen King's Salem's Lot. I got that one. And
So you started with this.
She got all the hits.
She was blown away by the Coppola version.
Mm-hmm. It's my favorite one too.
Yeah, not so much movies, but books.
Yeah, there were parts of it that I just, the choices that Coppola made, I just thought, like the scene where Lucy first gets bit, I think is just,
Oh, you mean when she's in the cemetery?
yeah,
As a wolf form?
where, you know, Mina's out looking for her, you know,
Yeah.
Dracula's in wolf form, humping Lucy on the bench.
Yeah.
Why?
They just wanted to go for a little bit of bestiality, I guess. It had not been done yet. It had not been done. So,
I'm curious if anybody in here saw the Shakespeare Tavern
Oh,
Dracula
yes.
thing.
Twice.
What'd you think about it?
I really enjoyed it.
I thought it was pretty good, but they, no Jonathan, no Mina, no
Yeah.
Quincy.
And also, I thought there were times when they kind of made the mistake of making Dracula look weak.
Well, was it based on the play? Because the play is stripped down a lot, and that's what that's what the Bela Lugosi movie is based on. It's based on the play. So that's why you don't get a lot of characters from the book in those early versions of the movie.
They make Von Helsing a woman, and she's a badass.
Yes.
How many people here have seen the 1978 Louis Jourdan BBC version?
yeah.
I mean, that's the purest
really
Dracula.
Thank you.
So, except for the staking of Lucy scene. I mean, the special effects are cheesy, but nevertheless, the staking scene of Lucy is the most gorily erotic thing you've ever seen. It just really caught I think what Stoker really meant by it.
I loved it. Louis Jourdan was the
Yes.
best. And his voice, in fact, his voice, I think, is the closest to what Stoker may have meant when he said Dracula spoke perfect English, except with a strange intonation.
Perfect.
And I think Louis Jourdan has that little bit of, is he foreign, is he not
He's
foreign?
French, yeah.
In his voice, and it's just perfect for him. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to apologize for myself for not bringing that up earlier, because that didn't happen. And I also wanted to thank you very much for bringing that up, because that's a huge gap we should be overlooked, because it's find a copy.
Yeah.
Maybe we have a hard time finding one.
Yeah, it is one of the more underrated ones.
Yeah.
But it is worth seeking out.
And that Dracula is not redeeming. He is vicious, he's mean, there's nothing about him that you feel sorry for.
I mean, that is not so much feral vampires, but that is just pure evil. That is the kind of vampire I really like.
To me, I think the most brutal Dracula is Jack Palance. Like, he's so violent and just a brute, and not sophisticated at all. Like, it's a complete, like, 180 from Jordan. Like, but it works. I mean, like, that's why I love, like, different versions, because they can work.
Well, he would inspire the Tomb of Dracula comics, so if you
Oh,
read
yeah,
them,
yeah.
Dracula's face is Jack Palance, so
Yeah,
that's how
I can
it
see
was.
that too.
And the Christopher Lee Dracula, he is not redeemable. I mean,
No.
he's a bad dude. He may have been erotic and been this person that rescues women from their patriarchal households, but he is not redeemed any other way. I mean, he's mean. I wouldn't want to get anywhere near that Dracula. He'd kill me, kick my ass. No, thank you.
I just wish they'd actually given him some lines in those movies.
It got worse and worse. I mean, you know, with the second one, he didn't even, Prince of Darkness, Dracula Prince of Darkness, he had no speaking lines except he growled a few times because he hated the script so bad, like, I'm not talking in your movie. You're lucky to have me.
The version that he does that's not Hammer, the Count Dracula, which they try to do a more literary version, is really interesting. I don't think that gets talked about enough either.
No, it's really interesting. It's just, I love it, but it's just
It's like,
boring.
here's a guy who's, yeah. But it's interesting to watch him play a whole different Dracula.
Yeah.
And it speaks to how good of an actor he was, because it's like, yeah, you just think of, you pigeonhole him in this, and that he's got the look, he's got the intimidation factor, et cetera, but then the guy can act too, and watch him play this completely different version of the same character that he's been playing for 6 movies or whatever. It's really impressive.
He was all about it because he'd always wanted
Yes.
to play a pure traditionalist Dracula, so he was just all about that version.
Yeah, because I know he didn't get paid much.
No. And you can
That is
tell,
a low budget movie.
you can tell his salary kept going up because by Dracula 80, 1972, he doesn't set foot outside of that desanctified church because they basically had him for one day. They shot his stuff in there really quick and then he was done. So good for him.
Yeah, well, I do kind of wish he was in the last one because it is weird seeing like another Dracula. Just
Oh yeah, the Seven Brothers beat Dracula, the Legend of the Seven Golden Men.
Yeah, because you've got Cushing, and it's like just to have Cushing without Lee is just like, oh.
I think it was a little too far for even Lee.
Yeah, but I can understand.
He already didn't like the 80, 1972. He did the Satanic Rites of Dracula, and he was like, God, I hate this. Nothing about this is Bram Stoker anymore. So imagine him going to Hong Kong now. I think we're just about out of time.
I was gonna say we have 3 minutes, and I have a prize to give out.
Oh.
I do. I have a prize to give out. We're giving out prizes, various random prizes in our panels all weekend long. You never know what's going to pop up, and this is one. But we need to figure out how we can give this prize out. Can you think of a good trivia question?
Give me 30 seconds.
Good trivia question.
Good trivia question. Should it be about Dracula novel or about Dracula films?
Dracula vampires can even be about anything else.
Okay, here we go. Which was the first mainstream Dracula film to actually show Dracula with fangs? First mainstream Dracula film where they showed him with fangs. It sounds simplistic, but it's not.
I was gonna go the Hammer version of Horror Dracula.
And why'd you guess that?
It was the early production after Lugosi. So after Lugosi, that's the closest thing I've got to the family tree.
Okay.
Well, that is correct. Yeah, if you go back and look at Lugosi and all of his vampire films, no teeth.
Nice.
An Aztec Batman symbol.
Oh, that's cool. I love that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Anything that you want to promote? If people can find you, if people can contact you, anything like that?
I would just say if you want to follow me, just add me on, well, you don't have to add me, but you can Google me. I have an academia.edu profile that I regularly update. Or you can just add me on Facebook, John Brown. But when I ever have a new Dracula book or vampire book coming out, I usually will post on there.
Awesome.
So add me on Facebook.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. And, we've got more panels tonight and tomorrow, so I hope to see you guys back in the room. Enjoy your Monsterama weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Yeah, that's like.
Let's get a picture.
Who's looking?
Can you do me a favor, take a picture? Or do I have to do the drive?
Vicious traffic, as opposed to.